Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Now, I've been accused of a lot of things in my life. People have called me a speciesist, a human supremacist, a leader of a hate group, and even a cannibal. And I assure you I'm only one of those things. Now, a lot of that stems from my Humanity First movement, and we placed it on a t-shirt, and yeah, it does say Death to Alien Scum on here, but I'm not just against aliens, we also have a t-shirt against dolphins as well. And the thing is, I don't actually hate all aliens. As a matter of fact, here are 3 aliens I like to eat. Ewoks, known for their delicious Ewok cheeks and a rare delicacy after the destruction of their moon Endor. Porgs, not only is their white meat delicious and healthy, they are ridiculously easy to catch. Kaminoans, high in omega-3 fatty acids and great raw. Although they tend to have high levels of mercury and sadism in their bloodstream, so doctors recommend that the average person only have Kaminoan twice a week. And even less if you're pregnant. Now, I could go on forever about different types of aliens that I would like to eat, but that wouldn't be fair to all the aliens that I don't like to eat. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the 10 worst aliens in Star Wars. The original scumbags of the Star Wars universe, the legendary Rakatans. Originating from the planet of Lehon, the Rakatans were a primitive race of aliens until the advanced ancient race of reptilian aliens known as the Qua introduced them to awesome things like the Force and Infinity Gates. Unfortunately, the Qua realized way too late that the Rakatans were evil, cannibalistic, bloodthirsty monsters. Before the reptilian aliens could stop them, the Rakatans had fully embraced the dark side of the Force and had stormed through the Infinity Gates and began their conquest of the known galaxy. The Rakatans would go on to wipe out the Qua and then enslave every sentient species that they ran into, including us. It's theorized that early human presence on worlds like Corellia, Coruscant, and Alderaan were all due to the Rakatan slave trade. The Rakatans established the Infinite Empire and would go on to develop many different technologies, including the first starships, hyperdrives, lightsabers, and even superweapons. But unlike other cultures, Rakatan technology was completely powered by the dark side of the Force. Legends say that the Infinite Empire was responsible for terraforming worlds like Kashyyyk for agricultural purposes and glassing Tatooine because the locals were pissing them off. After almost 10,000 years of domination, the Rakatans began suffering from a mysterious illness that cut them off from the Force. Without the Force, their technology was all but useless. And eventually, the numerous slave races rebelled against the Rakatans and took over their empire. The Force group called the Sith originally got their name from a species of the same name, also known as the Sith purebloods. This red-skinned species was originally the inhabitants of the Sith world Korriban.
Korriban, ancient birthplace of the Sith.
Like most evil people, Sith purebloods were genetically predisposed to be left-handed and also have red skin. A high percentage of their race was also Force sensitive. That combined with their left-handedness meant that most Sith purebloods embraced the dark side of the Force. Sith society was highly sophisticated and organized into a caste structure. But because of the warlike nature of the Sith race, the planet was constantly immersed in warfare, which served as a great way to limit their population growth and cultural advancement. When the first Dark Jedi were exiled from the Order, they eventually found refuge on Korriban and began interbreeding with the Sith. These Dark Jedi were professionally trained in the ways of the Force and were able to easily defeat even the most talented Sith warriors. Eventually, because of centuries of inbreeding, the pure Sith disappeared as the Sith Empire rose to power and consumed the galaxy in war. It was because of a small Bothan spy ring that the Rebel Alliance first found out about the construction of the second Death Star and Emperor Palpatine's presence. Unfortunately, this information was purposely fed to the Rebel Alliance in order to lead their fleet into a giant trap. Despite almost being responsible for the destruction of the Rebel Alliance, these Bothan spies were celebrated as heroes because
many Bothans died to bring us this information.
So I guess death is the ultimate escape from responsibility. No, but seriously, the Bothans were a truly vicious race of backstabbing, political maneuvering scum, which is why they made great politicians, spies, and used car salesmen. Tatooine was a horrible place to live. When there's so little water on your planet that moisture farming is actually a profession, that's just God's way of telling you to leave. Another clear warning sign is the Sand People, or the more politically correct term, Tusken Raiders. They are a direct representation of what happens to a people when they spend many generations on this godforsaken planet. The lack of water and resources on the planet led to their species' gradual evolution into a barbaric tribal society that worshipped water and feared evaporation so much that if you were caught outside of your robes, you would be punished for blasphemy. which is why no one is really sure what a Tusken Raider looks like under their mask. But some historians have theorized that the Tusken Raiders were actually humans who got lost in the desert during Burning Man. Well, while we're still here on Tatooine, we might as well talk about the other sketchy robe-wearing species known as the Jawa. Whereas the Tusken Raiders were religious fanatics and will gut you with a Jaffe stick for no reason, the Jawas were a bunch of lying thieves and dishonest merchants. These tiny aliens drove around Tatooine on giant sand crawlers and basically stole everything they saw and put speeders on cinder blocks. The little bastards had no shame, and whenever their sandcrawler came into a neighborhood, real estate prices usually dipped immediately. Imagine an entire race of aliens all suffering from a Napoleon complex that eat with their feet, and you had the Dug. These were overly aggressive aliens that were very xenophobic. This also meant that they rarely ever left their home planet of Malastare. Historically speaking, they were oppressed by superior civilizations like the Gran and giant monsters like the Zillobeast. The Dugs that did leave Malastare never really bothered to assimilate to the new planets they went to and usually hung out in isolated Dug communities. This is why many Dugs got involved in organized crime and were generally scumbags. I mean, what else do you call someone who tries to kill a 9-year-old in a high-speed pod race? Like some Lovecraftian nightmare, the Korans were sentient squid aliens and the less likable inhabitants of the water world of Mon Cala. No matter how hard they try to appear civilized, whether that be wearing clothing or building a giant city, at the end of the day, when a Koran shoots ink out of his ass, it's hard to forget that they're just talking squids. Like many of the aliens on this list, the Korans were super aggressive and warlike, but also terrible at winning conflicts, oftentimes losing to their more peaceful Mon Calamari neighbors. See, if the Korans had defeated the Mon Calamari, then they could have written their own history and made them seem a lot better, and most likely they wouldn't have ended up on this list. They might not look like it, but the Hutts are the result of some extreme natural selection. Legends say that the Hutts were originally from the terrible world of Varys, which was full of every predator imaginable. Now, it was on this planet that the Hutts gained the ability to regenerate almost anything after a gruesome battle, including limbs and even organs. One Hutt named Gargan was even able to regrow his or her brain after suffering a terrible head injury. I say his or hers because the Hutts were actually hermaphrodites and could self-procreate. They could also live for hundreds of years. But instead of using their long lives and amazing ability to survive to do good, Hutts were generally scumbags and gangsters and were usually involved with organized crime. Don't be fooled by a Hutt's lazy appearance, they are actually incredibly dangerous in combat. Neimoidians were basically Duros with their spines removed and their organs replaced with genetic waste. Other than that, they were physically quite similar to their distant, more adventurous cousins. Their culture, however, was extremely different. Neimoidian childcare was considered extremely bad by most sentient being standards. Babies, otherwise known as grubs, were tossed in communal areas where they were forced to compete for food and generally lived in terrible conditions. The lack of care for their young is probably why most Neimoidians grew up to be terrible people and extremely greedy and cowardly. As a matter of fact, the greatest insult you can give a Duros is to call them a Neimoidian. The Neimoidians' poor nutrition also meant that they had extremely weak immune systems, and it was well known that Neimoidians were usually the carriers of many diseases. However, this Hunger Games-style childhood did also make Neimoidians ruthless survivors, and they were known for their business acumen and predatory loans. Interbreeding with other species at best can lead to a sterile monster that likes to murder things. When your entire species is interbreeding though, you have some serious issues. The Dathomirians were a hybrid species with Zabrak and human blood that lived on the Force-sensitive planet of Dathomir. The species was separated between female Nightsisters and male Nightbrothers. The Nightsisters were Force witches and could use a special eye-core that came from the planet to make the Force do their bidding. The Nightsisters, being more powerful, enslaved all the males on the planet and bred them to be fighters to be sold off-world as bodyguards. The Nightsisters also occasionally sold themselves off as mercenaries. While they were practitioners of the dark side of the Force, they weren't exactly mainstream and liked to dabble in things like blood magic and alchemy. Well guys, you know what they say, never judge a book by its cover. Actually, in this case, judge a book by its cover. Don't even let any of these aliens close to you. Do as Han does, shoot first and then retcon later when the digital remaster version comes out of the incident. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.